right, hi everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us on today's webinar. Welcome, and my name is Ashley Sherrick. I am the Growth Marketing Manager here at Qualio, and today's webinar is how to fund your life science startup with non-dilutive funding. So just a quick note before we begin today about Qualio. So at Qualio, we do help life sciences companies just like yours to get new products to market by simplifying and unifying your teams, processes, and data into an all-in-one quality management software. So today we are very excited to introduce our speaker, Amro Eid from the FreeMind Group. He has years of experience working with different healthcare systems around the globe, and he's incredibly well versed in all the available non-dilutive sources of funding for life sciences. So today's structure of the webinar is going to be about 45 minutes long, and we will conduct a short question and answer at the end of today's presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to add them into the chat box and we will answer them at the end. If we don't get the chance to answer them, then we will absolutely answer them in the next couple of business days. And you will also get a copy of this webinar so you can look at it later on. So on that note, I will actually pass on the sharing to Amro and we can begin.
All right, well, Ashley, can you see my screen now?
I can, yes, you're good to go.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for the introduction, Ashley. It's greatly appreciated. And I want to thank the Qualio team for organizing this webinar. It's a great pleasure to be, always having those discussions about non-dilutive funding, because it's a very strategic source of funding that a lot of, startups can really count on. And I also want to take this opportunity to welcome everyone who's attending this webinar, all the registrants. Thank you for your interest and taking the time to attend. My name is Amro Eid. I'm the Director of Business Development at the FreeMind Group for the past 3 years now. I do have a background in biomedical engineering and also a Master's of Science in International Health Management. A quick introduction about this webinar will really serve as a very nice overview on all non-dilutive funding opportunities from different funding sources, including the mechanisms, the opportunities for different areas of research. And as Ashley mentioned, if you have any questions along the presentations, please write them down in the Q&A section, and we'll try to go through as many as we can towards the end of the webinar. And don't worry about writing notes. The webinar and the slides will be shared with you after we finish. So I hope you are all as excited as I am to move on and get this done. Okay, so I'm going to start with an introduction about us, who we are. FreeMind has been in this business for the past 2 decades now, since 1999, and really our focus has always been to support life science entities to raise non-dilutive capital from both federal sources and private foundations in the life sciences space. We have about 85 full-time employees. We submit on average about 700 to 750 grants per year, which results in aggregate awards, about $110 million that we raise on behalf of our clients. As for the client base, it's pretty diverse. About 70% of our clients are industry, from really small startups all the way to very few large pharma we work with every single year. And the remaining portfolio includes academics, university medical centers, universities, research institutes, and nonprofits. We also we have an international presence. I'm currently based in our international offices here in Jerusalem, Israel. About 30% of our client base are outside the US, and 70% are US-based entities. So it's a great honor to be presenting to you, with the funding landscape and all the opportunities. So to dive straight into it, we have over a $60 billion funding landscape here. that funds really all kinds of science related to human health. These sources include, of course, the NIH that has 27 institutes and centers, including the NCI or the National Cancer Institute, the NIDDK, diabetes, digestive and kidney diseases, NINDS, neurological disorders and stroke, NIBIB, biomedical imaging and engineering, etc. There's also other organizations within the HHS, such as BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research Development Authority, the FDA, the CDC. We also have the NSF, we have the Department of Defense. It has a lot of medical programs, whether it's from the US Army Medical Research and Development Command, whether it's from DARPA or the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DETRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and the CDMRP programs, which are the congressionally directed medical research programs. And also when it comes to private foundations, some examples that we target like Bill and Melinda Gates, Michael J. Fox, JDRF, MLS Society, and many, many more. If we go, to what these funding sources support, they really cover the entire R&D process, all the way from proof of concept with no or very little preliminary data, all the way to clinical trials, phase 1, 2, and 3. Of course, there are different funding mechanisms for different stages of development throughout the R&D pathway. So for early stage projects in the discovery phase, one can expect up to $300,000 for projects up to 2 years. More advanced projects that do have supporting data, they do have some preliminary data, but still in the preclinical development, up to $3 million, and anything in the clinical phase, much, much more. And as you can see here, we have different, as I mentioned, funding mechanisms. We have the SBIRs, the NSF, the DoD, the same thing here, with different stages. Of course, BARDA is pretty advanced, so depending on the kind of stage of development and how much data that you have, you really need to be aware to which funding mechanism that you should be applying to. Moving on to the most famous and largest agency in the US, the National Institutes of Health. Out of the $60 billion of funding that comes from the federal sources, the vast majority comes from the NIH. It's about $43 billion out of the 60, and most of it, about $35 billion, is for extramural research. So it leaves the NIH and it gets spread mostly to the US and also to other continents in the world. So if you look at the NIH categorical spending, you can see that it really also covers any illness known to man. You can see here where the NIH is actually spending its money. Now, before you start adding up these numbers, it is very important to note that these categories are not mutually exclusive. There's a lot of overlap. For example, you can see neurosciences and also brain disorders and also neuro diseases. So there's a lot of overlap. The same thing, with HIV or other infectious diseases that are specified, and also an infectious diseases as a category. And also when we're speaking about medical devices, that they could fit into all of those categories. So there's definitely a lot of overlap here. A quick overview on the role of non-dilutive funding. So this is a study conducted by the Milken Institute back in 2012. And as you can see, from the government agency's standpoint, every dollar they invest in R&D, in a company such as yours, there is a return on investment of $2.3. This is from the government agency's perspective. From a private sector perspective, for every dollar that a company raised from public or federal sources, there was an $8.38 as an additional investment within 8 years by the private sector. So as you can see, it's definitely a great tool that you can leverage to bring additional investments, and it's definitely a win-win situation on why the government funds you. Also more about the study that the Milken Institute conducted. As 50% of FDA-approved drugs and devices received federal funding during the course of R&D. So the importance of non-dilutive funding is also on facilitating the regulatory approval process and supporting the commercialization of funded projects. Okay, so now that we have covered a quick overview on the landscape and why it is very smart to pursue non-dilutive funding, let's take a look at some of those opportunities and submission types and routes. They really fall into three different categories. The main ones are called solicited and unsolicited. So the solicited approach are, those opportunities that address a specific call, a specific area of interest that has been issued from the NIH, from the program officers. So it's going to be a very specific title, and you can only submit to it when you get feedback from the officers and they say it seems like a good fit, and then you go ahead with a submission. About 30% of awards stem out from the solicited approach or from those specific calls that you find on the NIH website. The most common route, however, is the unsolicited approach. It's, some people call it the investigator-initiated approach. Some call it the omnibus solicitations. You may be all familiar with SBIR omnibus solicitations or parent announcements. So what happens here is that an investigator submits a research application. Depending on the specific aims on the project, it will be allocated to the appropriate NIH institute, the 27 ones we mentioned. And then based on that, you will be reviewed and ultimately funded by the appropriate institute. So these are parent announcements where the 27 institutes and centers participate in a parent announcement, in a big call. And 67% of awards actually come from this route. Tens of thousands of awards are issued from the US to applicants on an annual basis, and only 1,100 awards come from the solicited specific calls, and the remaining really comes from the unsolicited or the investigator-initiated approach. The broad agency announcements are mostly known for DoD and non-NIH grants, where they have a 250-page agency announcement about different funding opportunities for different funding levels for different program areas, and we'll discuss in more detail later in the presentation about some examples on the broad agency announcements. Okay, so as we mentioned, if you go ahead on the NIH website and you start looking for a specific solicitation that could be a great match to your needs, you can do so through this link here. There are currently about 1,193 solicitations open at this point of time. But if you haven't, if you didn't find a specific call that fits your project, that's as we discussed, that's completely fine, because then you will take the unsolicited approach. Okay, so in this part of the presentation, we're going to be focusing on the famous SBIR, STTR programs, mainly the features, including differences, similarities, some eligibility criteria for the applicants, various opportunities, and participating agencies. So a quick overview. The Small Business Innovation Research Program is a phase program. Phase 1 is called R43. Phase 2 is R44. The STTR programs, which requires you to partner with an institution, and I'll describe later on the specifics, or it's called R41 for the phase 1 STTR, and for phase 2 it's R42. To mention the mission and the goals of these programs, it's really to support the scientific excellence and technological innovation by investing into critical American priorities to really build a strong national economy. If you compare SBIRs to R01s or academic grants tend to be more hypothesis research driven, whereas SBIR opportunities have a much a different angle to how you structure the application, and it must be business oriented, including a commercialization plan. So if you look at some of the goals, it's really about increasing the private sector commercialization, as we mentioned, of innovations derived from federal research and development funding. It's about fostering and encouraging participation in innovation and entrepreneurship, also by women and socially or economically disadvantaged persons. The SBIR programs, the way it works and how they allocate funding, they are congressionally mandate set aside programs. What that means is that the budget for this program is set aside as a percentage of total funding available for each institute. So for the SBIRs, that would be 3.2% for every institute, like the National Cancer Institute, for example, with a budget higher than $100 million per year. So that would be $3.2 billion if that total budget for an institute is when we're comparing to the $60 billion landscape, it's about $3.2 billion minimum spend each year. The STTR programs, they have a lower percentage. It's about 0.45% of extramural research budget for agencies with a budget greater than $1 billion. About $500 million are being spent at a minimum each year from the STTR mechanism. Now, the SBIR STTRs are not exclusive from the NIH. It also has from the CDC, the FDA, the DoD, the NSF. All of them have SBIR STTR programs. More than 5,000 new awards from those mechanisms are issued on an annual basis. So what does an SBIR or STTR firm look like? So only US-based small businesses can apply to these programs, of course. But not only that, you have to meet all of the following requirements. The company must be for profit. It has to be located in the US and has less than 500 employees. Work must be conducted in the US, at least at the time of the award. And also at least 51% of the company must be owned by a US citizen or a permanent resident. When it comes to an awardee may be owned and controlled by more than one VC or hedge fund or private equity firm, so long as no one such firm owns the majority of the stock. Now, these programs, SBIRs, STTRs, are similar in many ways. However, they do differ they do differ when it comes to eligibility criteria, and you really have to think about who you are collaborating with and how much percentage of the workload they are taking when you want to apply for either an SBIR or an STTR. So the SBIR's requirements, it's not a prerequisite to have an academic partner or a nonprofit institution. It is allowed to have a research partnership with a nonprofit, but it's not a requirement. When it comes to the PI, at least 50% of the has to be primary employed with the company at the time of the award. As for the work requirement, the company for the phase 1 SBIR, they may subcontract up to a third of the total budget requested, and for the phase 2, they can outsource 50% of the work. When it comes to STTR programs, it is definitely a requirement to have a nonprofit research institution as a partner. The PI can be employed by either the research institution, the university, or the company. But of course, that varies depending on some specific solicitations. They have specific requirements, so always check the solicitations and speak with the officers before you start building the application, of course. As for the work requirement, the minimum work to be conducted in-house for the STTR programs is 40% in the business and 30% as a minimum from the research institution partner. As I mentioned, the SBIR, STTR programs are available from many government agencies, including the NIH, the NSF, the DoD, and others. However, today we will be focusing mostly on the NIH because, as we mentioned, it's the largest amount of money available from the NIH compared to others, and also a bit on the NSF. We're going to be discussing that. So in the NIH, approximately about $1 billion goes to NIH SBIR and STTR programs every year. The NIH programs are structured in 3 phases. We have, starting with the phase 1. It's about establishing the technical merit, feasibility, a proof of concept to determine the quality and the performance of the project before providing further federal support in phase 2. So for the SBIR programs, they normally do not exceed $250,000 for up to 6 months. For the STTR programs, it's the same budget, but for 1 year. As for the phase 2 program, the objective is really to continue the R&D efforts initiated in phase 1. The funding is based on the results achieved in the phase 1 grant after you got funded, and the scientific merit and commercial potential of the project proposed in phase 2. Only phase 1 awardees can apply for a phase 2 award unless we go for a direct to phase 2 track, and I'll explain. As for funding, the phase 2 program, it's the same thing for both mechanisms, up to $1.7 million over projects up to 2 years. So what do you do if you have a more advanced project, and $250,000 is not enough for a phase 1, and you want to go for a phase 2 directly? You can do that. So we have a direct to phase 2 awards that most solicitations accept. And they are issued to small businesses that did not receive a phase 1 award for that research and development project, but they have completed the phase 1 milestones on their own using non-SBIR funds. So that is definitely an option. There's also something that we call a second phase 2 award, or a bridge award, or phase 2B award, where agencies may award a second phase 2 to continue a phase 2 project. The purpose of this award is to support the next stage of development for federally funded SBIR projects, to address the funding gap, or known as value of death, between the end of the SBIR phase 2 award and the subsequent round of financing needed for commercialization. So this is not very well known, but it's not something new. The NIH, has been offering this type of opportunities for several years now. As I mentioned, you may know them as a phase 2B or competing renewal award, or a bridge award. I've seen many opportunities, and we have worked on many of those from the NCI, the NINDS, and HLBI, and others. But in order to be able to get the phase 2B award, the phase 2 project period must end no more than 24 months before you apply. As for the fast track award, as I mentioned, it incorporates a submission and a review process in which both phase 1 and phase 2 grant applications are submitted and reviewed together as a one application. So this really eliminates that funding gap between the phases, and it brings the total awarded sum to $2 million. So it's a combined phase 1 and 2 together. Now, if there are 2 questions that we ask, all of our clients, the companies we work with, before we apply for a fast track. And these 2 questions are, number 1, can you show a smooth transition between a phase 1 and a phase 2? Number 2, can you show a clear commercialization plan? These are 2 very important questions you need to verify before applying for a fast track combined 1 and 2 program. It's worth pointing out at this stage that the NSF, which does have SBIR, STTR programs, does not offer the fast track option. Looking at some important dates for the SBIRs and STTRs, both for phase 1 and 2s, it's 3 times a year, on the 5th of September, January, and April. As for the time it takes to get funded once you hit the submit button, it usually takes about 4 months to get an initial review, and 4 months, or a total of 8 months from the time the application is submitted until you have the money in the bank. Now, that being said, according to a dear friend that we know from the NCI SBIR Development Center, Dr. Todd Haim, they are working really hard to reduce the time from application to award to 6 months. And we're really seeing a lot of applications, from the ones we're submitting recently, that there's an improved timeline. About more than 50% of applications are being funded within 6 months. Of course, keep in mind, some mechanisms have non-standard due dates. That you could find a specific SBIR solicitation that is not a standard date. So always look at the specifics in the solicitation. Don't just think that all SBIRs have the fifth and the fifth and the fifth. They might change. Okay, so let's look at some of the funding opportunities within the SBIRs. As I mentioned, we have the solicited route. You address a specific area. Only 65 specific solicitations are currently open. More than 1,500 were closed. As for the unsolicited approach, as I've mentioned, you can apply as an investigator-initiated program, depending on your own objectives. There's no need to address a specific area. So let's start with some of the examples on solicited opportunities from the NIH, mainly on the SBIR, STTR programs. So we have different ones here. I think I might pause for a few seconds to let you go over those solicitations. As you can see here, we have really different specific calls for different areas, and also a lot of grants that deal with bioengineering research programs for medical devices. The NIBIB Trailblazer Award is also a very interesting one for medical devices, because it's the only institute within the NIH, the NIBIB that is, that funds medical technologies even without the need to specify an indication or a specific patient population. So that's very interesting. As I mentioned, only a third of total awarded money comes from this route, and the remaining about 67% of awards stem out from these solicitations, or the parent announcement, or the omnibus solicitation. So we have the classical SBIR omnibus opportunity here. We have a couple of them. We have the clinical trial not allowed and the clinical trial required. And this one is covered by the NIH, the CDC, and the FDA. The same thing here, but with the STTR programs, they also have two options, with clinical trial or not. So this is how the parent announcement looks like. If you go to the omnibus solicitation, you can see here all the participating institutes. Apologies for the next due date, it's supposed to be September 5th, but I think I think this slide was from a previous presentation that I did before April. In any case, so you can see here all the 27 institutes participate, and depending on the specific aims and the objectives of the proposal, it will be allocated and ultimately funded by the appropriate institute. As for the NSF, SBIR, STRs, it's, when it comes to funding, phase one, similar to the NIH, phase one is up to $256,000 for projects between 6 to 12 months. The phase two is up to $1 million over 2 years. As for the scope, it's really about early stage, R&D within the SBIRs. There's no fast track. You have to get the phase one. So, for small businesses, it is really based on innovation, innovative technology with potential for great commercial and, societal benefits. The program invites proposals from small businesses across a broad range of science and engineering disciplines. For example, we have, medical devices, of course, biological technologies, digital health, AI-based solutions, biomedical technologies, pharmaceutical technologies, and more. The beautiful thing about the NSF is that you can always apply. There's no specific due date. There are funding windows, but they are open throughout the year. So you can really submit at any time. So now that we mentioned a lot of things about the SBIR, STTR programs, they only make up about 4%. As we mentioned, they are congressionally mandated set-aside programs, and combined, they make about 4% of the total budget. So where are the other funding mechanisms? Here we have the classical parent announcements, the R21s, the R01s, which are very known to academics. While most companies prefer to submit to the SBIR program due to its commercial and economic impact, these parent announcements are more focused towards funding the science and the R&D activities, and not so much concerned about the commercial or the economic potential. So the way to structure the application is definitely different, even when using the same project, if you want to go for that opportunity or this one. More about the parent announcements. We have two main types, the R21s and RO1s. The R21s are for really early stage development, and then the R1s are for more advanced projects. Both funding routes have three options. As you can see, basic experimental studies with humans required, clinical trial required, or clinical trial not allowed. If you look at the R21, it's a high risk, high reward, as I've mentioned, because you can't have a lot of data and apply to these projects. It's about having no preliminary data or very little. As for the deadlines, 3 times a year on the 16th of Feb, June, and October. As for the budget, it's up to $300,000 with the indirect costs. And it's really about exploratory developmental research projects to really support the early proof of concept stage. This is how the the clinical trial not allowed R21 opportunity looks like. You can see a bunch of participating institutes here, and really before if you're not sure if you have enough, or if you have enough data to be even submitting to these projects, always reach out to the program officers, because even though they specify that no preliminary data is required, we always advise our clients to have as much data as they can to really support the application, even in the early stage kind of opportunities. So always reach out to the officers and share with them, get their feedback, seek their interest, see if it makes sense to go for this opportunity, or maybe you have enough data to go for the RO1 grant, which is more advanced. So this is the same R21 opportunity here, but for clinical trial required. The participating institutes are less here because of a clinical trial is required. And here we have the RO1 grants, also 3 recurring deadlines throughout the year. On the 5th of Feb, June, and October. The budget is much higher. It's up to $3 million with the indirect costs. It will support discrete specified projects in the areas of presenting scientific interests. The proposed project must be really related to the interests of one or more participating NIH institutes. So what they mean, because it's more advanced, you really have to show what you are focusing on, and really show a lot of supporting data to justify the budget. Okay, so this is also the same example on the RO1 grant for clinical trials not allowed. Once again, a lot of participating institutes, and this one for clinical trial required. Okay, so once we have discussed a lot of how you approach the funding landscape, what kind of opportunities, what happens when you hit the submit button. So the review process starts, and about 50% of applications are not even discussed. They're not given a score even. And 50% receive a score after the scientific review. So what about the scientific review? There are 5 parameters that are taken into consideration, starting with the significance. So does the project address an important problem? How significant will the change produced by the completion of the proposed project be? So that's all. How significant is the project to address those unmet medical needs? And once achieved, how will things change? Number 2, innovation. So how is the topic that the application discusses different than what exists today, and how it will revolutionize the field? That's what the whole innovation part is about. Leadership, of course. Does the PI have the required qualifications and expertise to carry out the proposed work? Do you have all the right members of the team to ensure a successful completion of the proposed project? We also have the environment criteria. Does the applicant have everything that is needed to carry out the project, including equipment, consultants, collaborators, CROs, if required? And the most important review criteria in the middle here is the scientific approach. So are the aims well planned and appropriate? Are there alternative strategies? This is, as I mentioned, the most important review criteria, and a bad score in this one usually leads to the application not being funded. However, it usually can be improved upon once you receive the summary statements and work on the weaknesses that the reviewers outline, so that you can resubmit the application in the next funding cycle by addressing those comments. So we've talked a lot about NIH funding. Let's have a look at other funding sources available. We have the FDA, of course. We have this opportunity as an example of the clinical studies of orphan products, addressing unmet needs of rare diseases. The deadline is on October 6th. The budget is up to $2 million for projects up to 4 years. It's really about supporting projects that address unmet needs in rare diseases and conditions, whether it's providing significant improvements in treatment or diagnosis. Studies should either result in a market approval or substantially contribute to the essential data needed for the medical product development. And also, this one, once again, is only clinical trials are allowed. So if you're not planning on having a clinical trial, the FDA opportunity would not be a good fit. Another interesting and very popular agency that a lot of people were more aware of it after COVID hit is BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research Development Authority. During COVID times, they closed all their programs, and they only kept COVID-19 related projects to be submitted. But this has changed now. It's back, working back to normal. They are, open to accept all types of projects that deals with, medical countermeasures, whether it's chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, accidents, pandemic influenza, emerging infectious diseases, all of it. The beauty of BARDA is that it really funds. It has no budget cap, and it really, as long as you are, advanced enough, post the IND phase, or the IDE phase, it really funds the whole thing. We have secured BARDA grants, $70 million, $30 million, tens of millions of dollars. Of course, BARDA has another program called RADx, Rapid Advanced Diagnostics, but it does have a budget cap. It's different. It's for more early stage type of medical devices also. A very interesting source of funding. The main areas of interest, as we mentioned, we have vaccines, countermeasures, antitoxins, therapeutic proteins, antibacterials, diagnostics, things to do with burn medical countermeasures, influenza, emerging infectious diseases, and production platform systems. The budget is not capped, as mentioned, but it's quite a hectic application. You start with a white paper, or even a tech watch before, but a white paper is a 10 pages pre-application to really, seek their interest and make sure that you qualify and you meet, what they're suggesting, and check all the boxes, because they don't want to be reviewing a 300-page application, and also you don't want to be writing a 300-page application before getting approval that this makes sense. And once you submit the white paper and you get invited to submit a full app, you are in a very good position to receive the funding, because most applications do not pass the white paper stage. After you submit the full application, the review is not over. There's some contract negotiations that we need to undergo, and we definitely help all the companies we work with in negotiations, and ultimately the award. We also have other programs here from the DoD, including the DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. It seeks to leverage and advance in engineering, computer science to drive and reshape biotechnology for national security. They are interested in a range of emerging technical areas, including human-machine interfaces, human performance, infectious diseases, synthetic biology, and many more. We also have DETRA, which is the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and it deals with all biological and chemical weapons, and also ABC pathogens. We also have from the DoD, the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command. It's really about solutions to the medical problems of the American and the importance of the American warfighter at home or abroad. Diving deeper into the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command, it's a BAA. Remember when we said the broad agency announcement? Because it has a lot of different areas of interest. There's no budget cap on this program. Some of the areas that I could fit into this page were military infectious diseases, combat casualty care, the military operational medicine research program, clinical rehabilitative medicine research program, and each one of those has like 4 or 5 more subtopics inside, and you have to at least address one of them. There's also medical biological defense, medical chemical defense, medical simulation and information sciences, and also radiation health effects research program. It works similar to BARDA. There's a white paper to be submitted, but it's only 2 pages. If successful, and you get invited to submit a 300-page application, followed by contract negotiations and ultimately the award. Another very interesting program from the DoD is called the CDMRPs, or the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. They are released once a year. Most of them require a pre-application. It's about $1 billion on an annual basis. And you can see here, there's different areas of interest, including multiple sclerosis. There's a lot of things on cancer here, breast cancer, lung cancer, kidney cancer, ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, melanoma, Parkinson's, Alzheimer, peer-reviewed cancer research program, which has 17 more topics of different cancers inside. There's the peer-reviewed medical research program that has more than 42 topics inside. It's going to be on the next slide. We also have orthopedic research, spinal cord injury, TBI, psychological health, vision. It's really a broad agency announcement here. Alcohol and substance abuse disorders. As for the CDMRP, PRMRP, or the peer-reviewed medical research programs, as I mentioned, there are various areas of interest, about 42 topics here. And as you can see, it covers, a lot of areas, including arthritis, diabetes, eating disorders, viral diseases, food allergies, hepatitis, malaria, IBD, hypertension, polycystic kidney disease, sleep disorders, arthritis, women's heart disease, suicide prevention, sustained drug delivery systems. Quite a broad area of interest here as well. All right, then. I hope by now you all have a pretty good idea on the funding sources and the mechanisms available to you guys. Of course, I'd like to finish the presentation by giving you some pieces of advice when attempting to pursue these sources. It's all about risk. It's all about risk, and really to maximize the chances of award, you have to minimize those risks as much as possible. So the first step before submitting an application is to identify the opportunities that fits your proposed project perfectly. To do so, we highly recommend seeking insight from the funders themselves and make sure that the proposed project is aligned with their interests and goals. If you scroll down to any solicitation, you see the contact details of all the research contacts, and you can email them, contact them, anytime, and really get their feedback. We do this on a daily basis, of course, working with about 250 clients a year. The program officers know us very, very well now because we speak to them a lot. This really helps, especially when there's a lot of overlap between, different opportunities that you may have identified. Which one is better? Which officer would be more interested to fund my project? This one or that one? So that's the first tip that I can give you. Second of all, you have to align the funding strategy with your own long-term R&D goals, and not the opposite. Don't change the way you do things based on an opportunity that you really like. Sure, you can edit and modify some sections to make it a better fit, yes, but never change your expertise, never change the way your research works and the priorities and your business goals. And always stick to your expertise and what you do best when considering submitting grant applications, because ultimately top science wins, and if you don't change the way you're doing things to make the opportunity a better fit, just stick to what you're doing, and make sure you correlate the granting strategy with your long-term plans. Third of all, so identifying all potential weaknesses in the proposed project. For example, if you are missing some data, get some data. If you're missing special expertise to complete the project, find the right partners if necessary. And yeah, these are the three main tips I have in mind when you want to lower your risk and submit those grants. As for FreeMind and our approach to funding, we have two main core processes that ensures maximum funding potential and lowest risk possible. We start with a strategic assessment, having a team of postdoc level scientists. They are called the strategists. What they do is understand the pipeline, all R&D activities, funding needs. They identify all relevant opportunities. After speaking with the funders, they build a granting strategy and execute it on a multi-submission basis, where not only each project can be a submission on its own, but each project or indication can be submitted to multiple sources at the same time. You can submit the same project to the NIH, to the NSF, to the DoD, to the US Army, and a private foundation at the same time. And the more shots you have on target, the higher the chances of being successful. And yeah, this is it for today. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. Of course, I'll be more than happy to have a separate discussion with anyone who might be interested. Here's my contact details in this slide, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you all, and I think I'll move the microphone to Ashley.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amro. So we do have a couple of questions here that, if you don't mind asking or answering real quick.
Yeah.
Fantastic presentation. So thank you for taking the time to do this today.
Sure.
So for timelines, is there a date of submission until the award?
Say again, I couldn't hear you.
For timelines. Yeah. Is there a date of submission until the award?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to timelines, it does vary to which, agency, which funding mechanism, which institute, but generally speaking, from the date of submission, if successful on the first try, you should have the money in the bank from the NIH within 6 months. If it's like the DoD or BARDA, it's usually between 6 to 8 months. Of course, on really urgent opportunities, they do have an expedited review process. Some of them get funded within 4 months.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, can we apply for more than one funding at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the essence of the multi-submission granting strategy. Sometimes different reviewers have different ideologies on how they review projects or the science. And it's really worthwhile to be submitting even the same project to multiple funders to really expand on that review criteria and have more people look at the project. Some agencies have higher interest in specific areas than others, so it would make perfect sense to do so, and it does translate into higher success rates based on our experience. But within the NIH itself, so you can submit to the NIH, DoD, NSF, private foundations, but within the NIH, you can only the same project can only be submitted to a single institute or an opportunity if it's the same exact title. If there are changes, that's fine, but if it's the same exact project within the NIH, it's only a one opportunity, but you can submit to the DoD, NSF, and other sources.
Great. So the next question we have is what other benefits result from the grant beyond the money received based on your experiences?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, non-dilutive funding is a great indicator for a company's strengths and potential. I mean, imagine your company strategy, science, and potential is reviewed by 5,000 of the world's best researchers and managers in your particular field. And you get their full review and feedback. These are people anyone would love to have on their advisory board. and they give you, a great feedback. This is an amazing tool. Every company would benefit from substantially, and it's not even dependent on you getting the funding. In addition, putting together an application would really require the company to present a long-term plan and strategy, which again is a great tool that allows the company to better position themselves with investors. Investors are also very much like to support additional funding and extra feedback and confidence coming from the NIH or any non-dilutive funding review. On top of that, I believe that the money itself is very substantial in several ways. Obviously, the money itself, receiving an award, doesn't only state that you have great science and great scientific and strategic positioning. It also allows you to keep a larger part of your company and to better position yourself with investors. And number two, as we mentioned, studies have shown that for every dollar that you raise from non-dilutive funds will lead to an investment of about $8 from private investors within 8 years. So non-dilutive money actually leads to more money. And it makes perfect sense. More confidence in the science, better positioning will definitely lead to a better position with investors.
Great. I think we have one more question. Is it possible to exceed the grant amounts listed in the solicitations?
Yes, you can. So it's not very straightforward how to do this, but you have to contact the program offices 4 to 6 weeks in advance of the submission. About 4 to 6 weeks before the submission due date, you have to speak with the funders and ask their permission to exceed the budget amount. We always do this. Very rarely that we win a project just on the actual amount. We always exceed the amount. If it makes sense, if the company can actually justify the budget. But I mean, for example, if a company is working on a September submission from now, that's not going to be possible. That would have to be 2 to 3 months in advance would be ideal in order to exceed the budget cap.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think that was all of the questions that we have. I hope all of our guests today now feel a little bit more confident in how they can get funding for their startups in the life sciences industry. And this was a fantastic presentation. So again, I really appreciate it. Qualio appreciates you taking the time out of your day. And
it's a pleasure.
To all the participants, like I've stated, you will get a copy of this webinar in the next couple of days. And if there's any questions for Ambro or myself or anyone at Qualio, please feel free to reach out and stay tuned for another webinar probably coming up shortly. So have a great day, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Grant. And thank the Qualio team for hosting me and organizing this beautiful event. And I look forward to next webinar.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right.